What happens in the mind of a teenager before they commit something irreversible? This question arose before Tulsa investigators in January 2023, when an ordinary family evening ended in a tragedy for which there is still no explanation. On January 5th of that year, the quiet residential neighborhood of St. Thomas Square in the heart of Tulsa, Oklahoma, was rocked by an event that stunned even seasoned police officers. That evening, April Lyda, a mother of 3, made a simple domestic decision. She allowed Zander, her middle son, to sleep downstairs. The boy had to get up early for school, and it seemed a reasonable arrangement. Her youngest son was to spend the night with his biological father. Only April, Zander, his older sister, and 2 domestic cats remained in the 2-story apartment. As evening approached, the mother and daughter went upstairs to bed, while the boy settled down on the sofa downstairs. No one suspected that this night would be the last of his life. Around midnight, screams pierced the silence of the apartment. Sharp, piercing screams. April woke instantly. The sounds came from downstairs, from where Zander was sleeping. Her first thought was a nightmare. The woman quickly descended the stairs, holding on to the railing. The living room light was off. She approached the sofa and tried to turn her son over to wake him, but the boy was silent. When she touched him, she felt something wet. She turned on the light. She saw blood. April began to shake her son more insistently. Zander briefly came to. His eyes partially opened, his lips moved, and he managed to squeeze out through the pain. "She stabbed me." His mother froze. She didn't immediately understand who he was referring to. Her son kept losing consciousness and then returning to reality. His breathing was shallow and hoarse. Lifting his shirt, the woman discovered several stab wounds on the boy's chest. The fabric was soaked with dark stains. April immediately dialed 911. Her hands trembled. Her voice broke. The emergency operator gave clear instructions: begin CPR. The woman knelt beside the sofa. Following the instructions, she simultaneously tried to find her daughter. She called her name again and again, her voice echoing off the walls of the empty rooms. But there was no answer. The girl's name is not being disclosed for safety reasons. A picture formed in the mother's mind. A burglar had broken into the apartment, attacked her son, and her daughter had either hidden in a panic, become the next victim, or managed to escape. The thought that her older daughter might be wounded or worse prevented her from focusing on what was happening right there under her hands. When the police arrived at the call, 3 cars, flashing blue lights in the dark street. They met the girl outside the house. She had run down the stairs and was now sobbing hysterically, crying out the same thing: "I'm sorry, I'm sorry." Her state of shock was evident. Her face was wet with tears, her hands trembling. But she almost immediately confessed, slowly, gasping between words, that she had stabbed her brother several times. She herself did it. By this point, Zander was still alive, though his condition was critical. April stood aside, watching as paramedics tried to stabilize her son. Gloves, compresses, quick movements, professional commands. The woman didn't believe what she heard from her daughter. She still thought an outsider had broken into the house, that it was his doing. but her daughter repeated her confession, again and again. The mother was screaming and crying at the same time. She couldn't understand the motive. She couldn't reconcile the two images, a loving daughter and someone capable of such an act. April cried out through her tears, "Pray he stays alive." Zander was rushed to a local hospital on a stretcher, which was loaded into an ambulance. Surgeons began the operation immediately. Doctors hoped for a miracle, although experience suggested otherwise. The daughter remained with the police and her mother at the house to explain herself. Cold January air, streetlights, neighbors' voices from their windows. Forensic specialists were already working at the scene, documenting evidence, recording on body cameras, documenting the schoolgirl's confession. April was in a hysterical state. Her voice would break, then quiet down. It took time for her to speak somewhat coherently. One of the officers brought her water in a plastic cup. She didn't drink. The girl herself was also extremely agitated. She cried uncontrollably, apologized, and repeated that she didn't understand what had happened to her. Her words came out in fragments. She pleaded for forgiveness, looked at her mother with wide-open eyes, expecting something: comfort, an explanation, forgiveness. Police inspected the living room where the attack occurred. The sofa, a pillow, blood on the upholstery. But they didn't find the knife. The girl immediately explained. After delivering the blows, she went up to her room, up the same stairs she had descended about 20 minutes earlier, and threw the weapon out the window. She just opened the sash and let go. Forensic specialists searched the backyard with flashlights and quickly found the knife in the grass under the second-floor window. The blade was covered in dried blood. The handle, too. The main question remained unanswered. Why did this happen? The schoolgirl insisted she didn't understand what had come over her. She described her state as some sort of demonic. The words sounded strange coming from her lips. Then, having calmed down a little, she recounted how the events unfolded. According to her, her brother had stayed up late watching a TV series. She heard sounds, music, dialogue, laughter off-screen, while upstairs in her room. She wasn't sleeping, just lying there. At some point, something switched in her head. That's how she described it. It switched, like a toggle. She got out of bed, took a knife from the kitchen, went down the dark stairs, and silently approached her brother. Zander was sitting on the sofa, facing the TV. He heard footsteps, turned around, and froze at his sister's unexpected appearance in the middle of the night. Suddenly, she inflicted several blows to his chest area, quickly, without a word, without warning. Later, 3 deep stab wounds, close together, were counted. The boy screamed. Only his scream brought his sister back to reality. It was as if she woke up. Realizing that something terrible had happened, she turned, ran upstairs, threw the knife out the window, and hid in her room until the police arrived. She sat on the floor, back against the wall, hugging her knees. Meanwhile, Zander was fighting for his life in the operating room. The injuries were deep. Surgeons saw that the blows were inflicted with force and fury, not accidentally. The girl, meanwhile, described her actions in detail to the police. An officer asked her to show exactly how she held the knife, how she stood. She stood up and demonstrated the movements, from top to bottom, sharply. Everything was recorded on video. It was clear that she was remorseful. Her voice trembled, her face was pale. She constantly repeated that her brother would be fine, like a mantra. The situation was extremely serious. If the boy didn't survive, his sister faced an accusation that they didn't even want to utter. Only her age remained a point of contention. Detectives suspected mental health issues. They began looking for signs of behavioral deviations, traces of self-harm, anything that could explain the inexplicable. And indeed, they found old cuts on the girl's right hand, thin white lines on the inside of her wrist. She didn't try to hide them. She confessed that she had inflicted them herself with an ordinary knife several months ago. The wounds looked old, already healed. Finally, April recovered enough to communicate with the police more or less coherently. But the woman found it difficult to concentrate. She was torn between worry for her son, who lay on the operating table, and fear for her daughter's fate, who stood nearby in handcuffs. She wanted to go to the hospital to be with Zander at this critical moment. She couldn't stay here. After a brief conversation with detectives, they recorded her name, address, basic information. April left for the medical center in a relative's car. At the same time, her daughter was placed in the back seat of a police car. Her hands were cuffed, too large for her wrists. She was taken to the station for questioning. On the way, the girl asked several times through the partition what would happen to her now. Her voice was quiet, uncertain. The investigators themselves didn't know the answer. Everything depended on whether the victim survived. They tried to reassure her, saying that Zander had a good chance. He received immediate help, and experienced doctors were doing everything possible. But they didn't quite believe it themselves. The schoolgirl worried if she would ever be able to return to her school, say goodbye to her friends. She was afraid of prison, afraid that she had ruined her life with one decision. She blamed herself. Then she began to sob again and pray aloud for her brother, quietly, almost in a whisper, her lips moving. But a legal complexity arose here. Under Oklahoma law, a perpetrator must be of a certain minimum age to be tried as an adult with a serious sentence. She was too young to meet this threshold. The situation also depended on whether Zander survived. If yes, one charge. If no, a completely different story. The girl unexpectedly opened up in the car. Between sobs, she told the police about her math teacher who had recently undergone treatment. Difficult treatment. When he returned to school, thin, pale, but alive, she liked his subject even more. She worried deeply about the teacher during his absence. She continued to cry softly and repeat how sorry she was about what had happened. The words sounded mechanical, as if she was trying to convince herself of their truthfulness. She also mentioned that she helped her mother around the house, washed dishes, cleaned rooms, did laundry, and looked after her younger brothers while April was at work. She fed them, read fairy tales, made sure they didn't fight. A typical older sister. The detainee even began to think aloud that everything happening was just a nightmare from which she needed to wake up quickly. She said she wanted to wake up and come to her senses, close her eyes, open them, and all this would disappear. Then she even asked for the handcuffs to be removed because she was a good girl. The officer looked in the rearview mirror, but said nothing. While the older sister was talking to detectives and trying to grasp what awaited her, Zander lay in the hospital under bright operating lights. April soon arrived there. The woman remained in the waiting area. White walls, plastic chairs, the smell of antiseptic, a ticking clock on the wall. One of the accompanying police officers joined her. He sat nearby, but not too close. The boy was alive, but his condition remained serious. Doctors were doing everything in their power. Every 20 minutes, someone from the medical staff would come out into the corridor, but there was no news. They tried to reassure the woman, informing her that her son's condition had stabilized. April replied quietly, looking at the floor, that she didn't want to lose both her children in one night. The words sounded like a statement of fact, without hysteria. While the police officer tried to support April, offering coffee from the machine, water, something else, he also gathered additional information for the report. He asked questions carefully, softly. The woman said she was raising her children alone. They had different fathers who hardly participated in their lives and offered no help, financial or otherwise. According to her, there had never been serious conflicts between the children. On the contrary, the brother and sister got along well and supported each other. They often practiced yoga together using YouTube videos, walked in the park, watched cartoons. Typical brother and sister. The woman didn't allow her children to swear. Even mild words were forbidden. She forbade them from watching horror films that could provoke aggression or nightmares. Every weekend, the family went to church, a small Baptist community 3 blocks from their home. Their upbringing was conservative, traditional. There were never serious problems with the daughter. She didn't show a tendency for violent behavior, didn't torment animals, didn't get into fights. At school, the girl was calm, docile, even a little shy. Teachers didn't complain. At least, that's how it was until the onset of adolescence, which began less than a year before the attack. During this period, the daughter became more withdrawn, spending more time alone. She could sit in her room for hours with the door closed, listening to music on headphones, keeping a diary. She started expressing dissatisfaction about various things: food, clothes, weekend plans. But this was more like typical teenage grumbling than genuine aggression. Just a normal adolescence. April considered this completely normal for her age. She saw nothing unusual in her daughter's behavior. It seemed like a normal period of puberty, even calmer than many other teenagers she encountered through her daughter's school friends. There were no conflicts in the family. The girl didn't even raise her voice at her mother, didn't slam doors, didn't throw tantrums. April was sure that the withdrawn behavior would pass on its own with time. She tried to support her daughter, asking how she was, offering to talk, and not pressure her unnecessarily, giving her space. The woman tried with all her might to maintain a healthy atmosphere at home, despite constant work fatigue. Neighbors and relatives later confirmed this. No one noticed the girl behaving like a troubled teenager capable of what happened that night. It looked like a sudden act of unmotivated cruelty, without warning, without escalation. April raised 3 children alone: Zander, his older sister, and younger brother. She spent most of her time at work, 8-hour shifts, sometimes overtime, to provide the family with everything they needed. Coping with all the difficulties was not easy. Bills, food, clothes, school supplies. Zander's biological father only occasionally appeared in their lives. Once a month, maybe twice, picking up his son for the weekend. And the fathers of the daughter and younger son didn't show up for years at all. Despite a little help from the men and relatives, the grandmother sometimes came to babysit. It wasn't easy to fully look after and care for the children. The woman told the police officer slowly, choosing her words, that she had no idea what could have caused such a fit of rage in her daughter. Before this, there had only been ordinary, short-lived quarrels between the children, over the TV remote, over who got into the bathroom first, minor things. They quickly passed. The children never fought physically. They always reconciled quickly and calmed down. It resembled typical brother-sister relationships found in millions of families. The family atmosphere was comfortable, and both parents, even those who rarely appeared, contributed to it. Although Zander's father was not very involved in the children's lives, when he did appear, the man never favored his biological son at the expense of the others. He paid equal attention to all 3 children so that no one felt deprived or like an outsider. April was sure that she and her ex had built their relationship such that none of the children experienced a lack of attention or jealousy. At least, that's how it seemed to her. However, there were facts that contradicted these words. Cuts were found on the schoolgirl's wrists, which she had inflicted herself with a sharp object. The detective rightly believed that mental problems could have played a key role in what happened. Perhaps something had been developing unnoticed for a long time. Towards the end of the conversation, the police officer took a form from his folder and asked April to sign a voluntary consent for a house search. The woman was sure that nothing criminal would be found there. No substances, weapons, strange notes. So she signed the document without hesitation, with a trembling hand. The detective carefully folded the paper and left. Now a group of forensic specialists needed to be sent to the area for a full inspection. Soon, April's relatives arrived at the hospital: her sister, cousin, aunt. Everyone wanted to support the woman and Zander. They sat silently nearby, holding her hand, bringing tea. Unfortunately, the efforts of the medics were in vain. The boy's condition sharply deteriorated approximately 2 hours after the start of the operation. His blood pressure dropped, his heart stopped. Resuscitation did not help. At 2:30 a.m., he passed away from his injuries on the operating table. The surgeon came out to the family and delivered the news. April covered her face with her hands. Around 4 in the morning, one of the detectives brought the girl to the interrogation room at the station. She was still visibly nervous and shaken, but they managed to partially calm her down by repeating that doctors would help Zander. They didn't immediately tell her the truth, that her brother was gone. Not yet. The girl was examined under camera. Her arm cuts were photographed, bruises were documented and recorded in the report. Soon, April arrived at the station, her eyes red from tears. The woman had lost her son, but wanted to support her daughter. She believed that everything happened unintentionally, that her daughter was not fully to blame. The detectives were going to conduct an interview with the girl in the mother's presence. The woman slowly entered the room, sat on a chair next to her daughter, and took her hand. Then, quietly, with pauses, she told her daughter that her son could not be saved, that he was gone. Both burst into tears simultaneously, loudly, sobbing, embracing each other. The schoolgirl constantly begged for forgiveness, repeating it over and over through her tears. Early in the morning, police continued to work at the Lied family's house. Forensic specialists methodically examined the crime scene, looking for answers to questions that multiplied with each passing hour. Several people examined the rooms, measuring, photographing, collecting samples. Others went around to neighbors' houses with notebooks, asking questions, recording testimonies. This morning proved especially grim for the neighborhood. Tulsa police had already dealt with several cases since the beginning of the year, but none had been committed by such a young person. For local residents, the girl's actions came as a real shock. You don't expect to see something like that in a quiet neighborhood where everyone knows each other. No one suspected her of being capable of such a thing. People shook their heads in disbelief. They confirmed April's words. The daughter had never been involved in criminal incidents. She didn't steal, didn't misbehave, didn't get into conflicts. She was always quiet, non-confrontational, didn't harm animals in the yard. Some neighbors described her as excessively withdrawn, but she certainly didn't seem like someone capable of such an act. A thorough search was conducted in her room. They opened wardrobes, checked desk drawers, leafed through books. But nothing incriminating was found. There was nothing forbidden there. No substances, strange objects, disturbing drawings. The diaries contained ordinary teenage experiences, entries about school, friends, teachers, dreams of the future. No disturbing search queries or correspondences were found in her browser history or on her phone. Everything looked strangely normal. When such an act is committed spontaneously, without preparation or warning signs, it is more an exception to the rule in forensics. Usually, a person moves towards a serious crime gradually, through escalation, starting with minor offenses, aggression towards animals, fantasies about violent acts. Detectives went to the girls' school that same morning. They spoke with the principal, class teacher, and school psychologist. But there too, they heard the same stories about her calm nature. She studied well, didn't skip school, wasn't rude to teachers. A quiet girl in the middle row. Meanwhile, the suspect was in custody at the Family Juvenile Justice Center, a special facility for minors. She was placed in a separate room under observation. The motive for the attack had still not been uncovered, which further complicated the situation for the investigation. Despite the recorded confession, videotaped and documented in the report, the procedural question continued to be debated: how to deal with the perpetrator given her age. State law did not provide a clear answer. Although April had lost her son Zander, she publicly stated a few days later that she believed in justice for her daughter, not punishment, but justice. She hoped to address her problems and believed that the girl would return to the family when all this was over and she had undergone treatment. The woman was firmly convinced that her daughter's actions were solely related to mental problems, not malicious intent. April told the detectives more about her daughter's medical history. Several years ago, her daughter was prescribed medication for attention deficit hyperactivity disorder. The diagnosis was made quickly, after a single consultation. Sometime after she started taking the pills, she noticed changes. The schoolgirl began to behave more aggressively than before. It seemed she experienced irritation without reason over any minor thing: a loud sound, bright light, someone's request. At first, this was not perceived as an alarming sign by the mother, just a side effect of adapting to the medication. Several years passed. The girl began to withdraw even more, communicating less, even with close people. She avoided conversations at dinner, went to her room immediately after school. The most alarming fact was self-harm, cuts on her wrists, which she hid with long sleeves. Not everyone believed April's version that the prescribed medications could have affected her daughter so strongly as to cause a manic state or psychotic episode. Attention deficit hyperactivity disorder is a fairly common problem among school-aged children. Millions of children take similar medications. However, this syndrome itself does not cause a propensity for aggression, cruelty, and unpredictable behavior of such magnitude. This syndrome could have masked a more serious illness: bipolar disorder, schizophrenia, other mental deviations. But in the medical institutions the girl visited all these years, there were no corresponding records of suspicions of anything similar. Only ADHD. April went to the clinic as soon as she noticed the first signs of problems with her daughter. The woman saw instability in her condition and wanted to help, to make her more balanced and calm. When she first brought her daughter to a specialist, he spoke with the girl for about 40 minutes, asking questions, observing her behavior, and without long hesitation made the diagnosis: ADHD. He prescribed medication, wrote a prescription. This happened several years ago. The girl took the medications regularly all this time. However, less than a year before the attack on her brother, she began to have new problems. Her academic performance sharply declined. She started missing assignments, couldn't concentrate in class. April again started trying to find out what was happening with her daughter. Teachers approached the woman, concerned about the changes. Following the recommendation of school health workers, she again spoke with her daughter one-on-one, and the latter, after a silence, confessed to having hallucinations. The girl started seeing something strange: shadows, figures, ghosts in the corners of the room, which warned of the impending death of a loved one. Then the frightened mother urgently took her back to the clinic. The doctor listened, frowned, and decided to adjust the therapy. He prescribed new medications, a different dosage. But the situation only worsened in the following weeks. The hallucinations did not go away, and the girl became even more withdrawn. A month before the irreparable happened, April made the independent decision to stop all medications. She simply stopped giving her daughter the pills. Now, looking back, the woman began to analyze in more detail the events preceding the tragedy. She took a new look at old problems: reclusiveness, cuts, strange behavior, and concluded that her daughter had experienced a manic episode when she inflicted those cuts on her wrist. Unfortunately, due to a lack of necessary knowledge about psychiatry, the mother simply did not perceive this as a serious warning sign requiring immediate intervention. She decided then that it would be enough to take her daughter out of regular school and transfer her to homeschooling. Less stress, less peer pressure. It was at this point that she timed the complete discontinuation of the medication. The woman considered this a temporary measure for a few months. She continued consultations with experts at the clinic, called and visited. But due to constant work and a busy schedule, 8 hours on her feet every day, she couldn't do it regularly enough. Before making the final decision about homeschooling, she consulted with teachers and the school administration. The woman was reassured, as they stated professionally and confidently, that about 25 children were simultaneously homeschooled at their school for various reasons. For many, this truly helps them cope with adolescence and similar psychological problems. This calmed the worried mother, alleviating some of her anxiety. She had no idea then what all of this would turn into in a few months. At the same time, April never feared for her younger son's physical safety when he was with her daughter. Zander and his sister never had serious conflicts or fights. Even during a period of noticeable deterioration in her mental state, the older girl always showed visible love and care for her brother. She read to him at night, helped him with homework, and protected him from bullies in the yard. The girl continued to insist in conversations with psychologists and detectives that she still didn't understand why it happened that way. She described her state that night as some kind of demonic madness or possession. It was as if she was observing what was happening from the outside. She saw herself, as in a movie, like a stranger, and couldn't do anything, stop it, or scream. Allegedly, she didn't fully control her actions. At the same time, now, having come to her senses, she felt an intense sense of guilt that kept her from sleeping and eating. Naturally, this description reminded psychiatrists of symptoms of something much more serious and alarming than typical attention deficit hyperactivity disorder. After several days of interacting with law enforcement and the initial shock, April made statements on a local news channel. Journalists showed immense, almost unhealthy interest in the case. It was an unprecedented event given the age of both parties. Everyone eagerly interviewed the mother, who had lost a son but defended her daughter. Cameras, microphones, questions. The materials instantly went viral on social media, gathering millions of views and thousands of comments. The woman sat before the camera with a pale face and red eyes. She openly blamed herself, believing she hadn't shown enough attention and professionalism as a mother to recognize her daughter's alarming symptoms in time and prevent the tragedy. According to her, in the months leading up to the attack, the girl increasingly and for longer periods isolated herself in her room upstairs. She spent 5 to 6 hours straight there, refusing any contact with loved ones. She wouldn't even come out to eat. For their family, this was extremely unusual. Previously, the daughter had been sociable and open, but the mother attributed the gradual changes in behavior to typical teenage problems and hormonal changes. She distinctly remembered going through a similar transitional period herself. Reclusiveness, mood swings, a desire to be alone. Many viewers and acquaintances comforted the mother after the interview, sending supportive messages. However, during the investigation, the police uncovered details that April might have truly missed or overlooked. Friends of the assailant, several classmates, provided detectives with frightening information during interviews. It turned out that at least 3 of the schoolgirl's friends had heard a direct confession from her that she wanted to harm her brother. Not an abstract "he annoys me," but a concrete intention. This occurred shortly before the attack during a casual conversation during break time. Likely, the friends didn't take these words seriously at the time. They thought she was just blowing off steam, exaggerating because of some argument. Therefore, they didn't tell anyone about it, not even their parents or teachers. April, however, firmly insisted that she herself had never directly heard anything of the kind from her daughter. There were no such alarming entries even in her personal diary, which was confiscated and carefully examined. Professionally assessing the situation, expert psychiatrists confirmed that some medications for attention deficit disorder can indeed provoke dangerous fluctuations in mental state in predisposed individuals. This happens relatively rarely, perhaps one case in 1,000 patients. Certain unfavorable circumstances must coincide: genetics, stress, other factors. Zander's sister might have fallen into that small percentage of people who become unexpectedly aggressive while taking such medications, exhibit sharp impulsivity, or develop a tendency towards self-harm. All of this indeed corresponded to the observed behavior of the teenager in the months leading up to the incident. But there were also serious opponents of this theory among the medical community. They logically argued that over several months, during which the schoolgirl had completely stopped taking the medication after discontinuation, it should have been fully eliminated from her body naturally, and thus could no longer cause any active side effects at the time of the attack. April continued to stubbornly defend her version and her daughter, believing that the medication could have caused serious, irreparable damage to her brain years ago, during the period of active use. Although such a perspective logically explained what happened, not all experts approached by the media supported this controversial opinion. The girl found herself in a juvenile detention center while awaiting preliminary hearings. Initially, procedural questions about how to legally proceed with her were discussed at length. Concurrently, experienced psychiatrists worked with her daily, providing intensive therapeutic assistance and thoroughly assessing the suspect's current mental state. Throughout this observation period, several weeks, she showed no overt alarming symptoms, sharp mood swings, aggression, or a propensity to inflict physical harm on herself or others. She was surprisingly calm, non-aggressive, even apathetic. This became a significant reason for some experts to dispute the mother's opinion about the long-term harm of the medication. Many psychiatrists stated in their conclusions that if the medication had indeed caused serious, irreversible organic damage to brain structures, then the girl, even behind bars and under stress, would have continued to consistently display pronounced signs of mental abnormalities. But this was not the case. A number of other experts put forward an alternative theory, that before the attack, the girl experienced some very strong acute stress or a traumatic event in her life. Unfortunately, neither she herself, nor her mother, nor her immediate circle, friends, relatives, teachers, had even approximate guesses as to what exactly could have so critically affected the teenager during that period. Ultimately, they settled on the cautious opinion that certain hidden multiple factors played a significant role, which collectively could have caused a brief acute psychotic episode on that particular night. Initially, detectives seriously considered the theory that illicit psychoactive substances might have been involved in the incident. Perhaps the girl experimented, took something that caused an inadequate reaction. However, During her detention, the schoolgirl was not diagnosed with any physical or psychological dependencies whatsoever. Toxicological examination of blood and urine unambiguously showed that her body was free of any substances. A thorough search of the house found nothing incriminating: no pills, no powders, no plant material. The girl's close friends also unanimously stated that they had never seen her use even the lightest substances or show interest in the topic. The idea of primary mental health problems remained the main and most probable theory on the investigation's agenda. The juvenile offender was unable to fully and clearly explain her actions, even after several intensive months of daily work with qualified doctors and psychologists at the beginning of her mandatory rehabilitation course. The theory of a sudden, brief psychotic episode logically explained what happened from a medical point of view, although far from all specialists were ready to accept this idea unconditionally without further research. A number of independent experts who worked directly with the teenager at the center gradually came to a different conclusion. They suggested that she might have been developing a serious bipolar disorder since early childhood, which was initially misdiagnosed as a milder ADHD. In this case, prolonged use of medications for attention deficit disorder would not only have been ineffective, but could even have significantly worsened the actual situation and provoked manic episodes. April continued to firmly insist in interviews and conversations that her daughter had always behaved well throughout her life, being a calm, reserved, and obedient teenager. After the onset of her detention in a closed facility, bipolar disorder, if it truly existed, could not simply disappear or hide. Quite the opposite. It could only have worsened under conditions of stress, isolation, and trauma. But doctors observed nothing of the kind in the girl. Amidst media discussions and public outcry, people emerged who actively spoke out against the mother's stance. Concerned citizens loudly declared in comments and forums that the woman was behaving completely wrongly and immorally by continuing to openly support a person who had done what she had done. But the mother had no intention of backing down under the pressure of public opinion. April firmly believed that her girl needed maternal support and professional psychiatric help now more than ever. The woman was absolutely certain that everything that happened was a direct result of medical error and incorrect diagnosis, and that, in her right mind, in a normal state, her daughter would never, under any circumstances, have attacked her own younger brother, whom she loved. Some observers perceived the woman's behavior as the act of a truly heroic mother who, with all available strength, continued to protect her teenager despite the enormity of what had happened. But the matter was not without harsh, sometimes cruel criticism. The mother complained in interviews that she had faced open condemnation and even threats from neighbors who closely followed the developments through the news. Someone wrote an insult in paint on their house fence. Someone threw stones at their windows at night. Numerous opponents emerged online, openly calling her a bad, irresponsible mother. People wrote in comments that she had not given the girl enough attention for years, had missed all the signs, and ultimately failed to protect her son from a danger that grew under the same roof. Despite all this sharp, painful criticism from all sides, April continued to consistently defend her daughter publicly. In every interview she gave to local and regional channels, she repeatedly stated that she was simply waiting for the moment when it would all finally end and her daughter could return home to the family. The woman realistically understood that it would take a very long time, perhaps years, to fully recover psychologically after this frightening, traumatic episode for everyone. But she categorically refused to abandon the girl, to give up on her. The mother did not miss a single opportunity to publicly state that she blamed herself first and foremost for what happened to her younger son, and for the critical deterioration of her elder daughter's mental state, which led to the tragedy. Many heated discussions in the medical community and media revolved around a specific drug that had been used for years to medically manage the girl's attention deficit disorder. Pharmacological experts cited numerous large, independent studies conducted over recent decades, which convincingly confirmed its clinical effectiveness and relative safety when properly administered. This indirectly supported the alternative idea that the girl might have initially suffered from something much more serious and dangerous than simple ADHD, and she was simply given a fundamentally incorrect initial diagnosis at the very beginning. In that case, this specific drug physically could not alleviate her real condition, but only masked the symptoms. The girl's family suffered serious reputational damage when concerned local residents, journalists, and police detectives began methodically digging into their past, including their dirtiest laundry. The meticulous work of investigators made it possible to find old medical and police records, according to which April's mother, in her early youth, had actively used prohibited psychoactive substances for some time and was officially listed as an addict in a rehabilitation program. She finally gave up all of this only when she unexpectedly learned of her pregnancy with her future daughter. Prior to that, she had used systematically, almost daily, for a long time. This could theoretically have affected fetal development. Detectives then analyzed the biological father's criminal past. Database checks revealed that he had also suffered from severe addictions, heroin, methamphetamine, for a long time, and had even repeatedly served actual prison sentences for possession and distribution. Logically, it turned out that the girl was originally born into an extremely disadvantaged, dysfunctional family, and spent her critical early years growing and developing in such a toxic, dangerous environment. When April was still carrying her pregnancy with her daughter, the biological father was behind bars for 2 years precisely because of another case involving prohibited substances. When the man was finally released, the emotional and physical connection between them had already been completely, definitively severed. By that point, April had firmly decided that she wanted to drastically change her life and start anew with a clean slate for her daughter's sake. The girl's father did not particularly insist on participating in her upbringing and simply, quietly disappeared, vanished. No one heard anything more about him. But starting a full life with a clean slate, as it turned out, was not entirely successful. The girl's stepfather, Levi Lida, Zander's biological father, also had serious documented problems with the law. Repeated driving while heavily intoxicated, disorderly conduct involving the use of force, and even car theft. Several years before the tragedy with Zander, he was officially accused of animal cruelty after a horrific incident. While drunk, he drowned a small kitten in a bathtub full of water in front of the girl, who tried to stop him and cried. Perhaps this extremely traumatic, shocking event had a serious negative long-term impact on her developing psyche. On that occasion, the man made a plea bargain through his lawyer, formally admitting to the unlawful acts against the animal. He stated in court that the act was solely caused by heavy alcohol abuse and loss of control. For this crime, he was forcibly sent by court order to long-term inpatient treatment for alcohol addiction at a specialized center. But the history of Zander's father's domestic problems did not end with this episode. It continued. Later, while serving a prison sentence for another offense, he brutally beat his cellmate in the shared cell so severely and for so long that the cellmate suffered a diagnosed moderate traumatic brain injury and spent a week in the prison hospital. When all these extremely unsavory episodes of the girl's biography and her biological family gradually became known to the general public through journalistic investigations, many people began actively citing them as the main root cause of the gradual deterioration of her mental state, which ultimately led to that terrible tragedy. But all this discovered past and expert versions offered little practical help to the work of the justice system in the present. The main procedural difficulties were primarily related to the perpetrator's formal age. At the time of the act, she objectively did not fall under the standard criminal legislation of the state of Oklahoma, which clearly applied only to older offenders. Before reaching this threshold age, minors legally could not be fully prosecuted as adult citizens. Against this legal backdrop, authorities simply did not know what exactly to do with her next. By April of that same year, 2023, 3 months after the incident, the girl's mother gave another in-depth interview to a local newspaper. She publicly stated with bitterness that her daughter had still not been formally charged with any official accusations by the prosecutor's office. The case was in limbo. It was realistically not ruled out that charges might still follow in the foreseeable future once lawyers sorted out the procedural intricacies. The woman, for her part, openly expressed sincere hope that her daughter would ultimately face not harsh, long-term imprisonment in a general correctional facility, but specialized psychiatric treatment and comprehensive rehabilitation in a closed medical institution. This humane view of the situation was actively supported by April's extended family, grandparents, aunts, uncles. All relatives rallied emotionally around her after the tragic loss of Zander, providing what support they could. The mother detailed to the journalist that she felt a heavy, oppressive guilt towards both her children. After all, as a parent, she had once promised them absolute safety and protection in their family home. She had promised that home was a fortress. Now the woman keenly felt that she had fundamentally failed both of them, having failed to recognize the danger in time. To somehow cope with the severe financial burden that had fallen upon them, funerals, lawyers, psychologists, loved ones organized a public charitable fundraiser on the popular crowdfunding platform GoFundMe. The campaign unexpectedly proved relatively successful. This allowed them to raise about $20,000 from sympathetic strangers within a few weeks. The money was intended to help with complex legal issues related to the girl's defense, and for the mother to urgently move with her younger son into a completely new home. The woman made the painful but necessary decision to start life completely anew, in a new place, in a different part of the city, where she and her children would not be constantly recognized, condemned by aggressive neighbors, and where traumatic memories of that night would not haunt them. This decision predictably provoked very contradictory, polarized opinions in society. A significant portion of concerned people sincerely supported the noble fundraising initiative, publicly calling April a truly good, loving mother who, despite everything, unconditionally continued to love her traumatized teenager and actively helped the girl to recover psychologically. Other commentators, however, sharply believed that the mother was behaving too leniently, excessively loyal and permissive towards the perpetrator, who deserved severe punishment. To this day, the girl is in a special closed center for juvenile offenders and undergoes intensive daily psychiatric treatment under medical supervision. She still keenly feels guilty about what happened and constantly worries when talking to psychologists that she has irrevocably ruined her entire future life with this impulsive act, that now she will never have a normal childhood, education, friends, or family. Her final legal fate has still not been decided by the authorities. The question remains open. If she is ultimately officially tried under the juvenile justice system as a minor, taking into account all mitigating circumstances, she realistically faces a relatively short term of several years in a special institution. According to lawyers' predictions, she will most likely not be physically held in strict custody beyond the age of majority. After that, she could theoretically be released on parole with good behavior. However, if the state authorities unexpectedly decide, for the sake of precedent, to try her as an adult, despite her formal age at the time of the crime, which is extremely unlikely, but legally possible in exceptional cases, she could hypothetically receive a much, much longer actual prison sentence. Perhaps even life imprisonment without the possibility of parole. April, for her part, firmly plans to officially file a large civil lawsuit in court in the near future, simultaneously against the pharmaceutical company that manufactured that drug and against the specific treating psychiatrist who prescribed this medication many years ago without sufficient examination. She still sincerely believes it to be the direct pharmacological cause of her daughter's irreversible mental changes and subsequent uncontrolled aggression.